Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jeremiah Martinez, and we're here to discuss everything there is to know about fantasy football. And I think it's officially the last week of the fantasy football season, and I know it's a sad end. It's pretty much over after this week. Talking about all these players that, you should add and, do all this and that. But, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. We got one more week of talking about, who to start, who to sit and all that, who to pick up. Pretty much one more week of in-season advice. And, let's get started. First, like always, I'm always going to talk about the Monday Night Football game. And the Carolina Panthers defeated the Washington Redskins last night, 26-15, in a game that the Panthers look like they look like the team that went on that Super Bowl run last season. For fantasy purposes, we do have a lot of really good fantasy performances. Cam Newton actually had a really good performance. He had 300 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. He did have 3 carries, but he didn't get any yards off of those carries. But going to the Washington Redskins, Kirk Cousins, he had 315 yards passing. Okay, looks pretty good. But he didn't have any touchdowns, and he had 1 interception. So overall, it just wasn't a good day for the Washington Redskins offense. To the rushers for both teams, Jonathan Stewart, he did have a pretty good day. He had 25 carries for 132 yards. And Kirk Cousins was the leading rusher for Washington. He had 2 carries for 11 yards. Robert Kelly, the starting running back, he had 9 carries for only 8 yards and a touchdown. He did have a touchdown to save his day, but he only had 8 yards on 9 carries, and that is that's dreadful. That's dreadful. The Redskins, they couldn't run the ball last night. They could not run the ball against this team. They only had a total of 29 rushing yards. The offense just wasn't clicking last night at all. You had Kirk Cousins probably could have had, a touchdown, but it was dropped by Vernon Davis. Jordan Reed, he didn't really have a really good day. He only had 1 reception for 6 yards. He did get ejected at the end of the third quarter after pretty much a bonehead move. The leading receiver for Washington was Deshaun Jackson. He had 7 receptions on 10 targets, 111 yards, no touchdowns. Pierre Garçon had just as many receptions. He had 11 targets and 78 yards. So, overall, the numbers do look good for the Washington Redskins, receivers. I know Robert Kelly was even involved as well. He did have 47, receiving yards. He did have 4 targets. So he didn't have much on the ground game, but he did have 47 yards through the air. As for the Carolina Panthers, Greg Olsen was the leading receiver, 85 yards on 9 targets. He had 6 receptions. Tegan Jr., 64 yards on 4 receptions and 1 touchdown. He did have 8 targets, so he was targeted heavily a lot in this game. As for Kelvin Benjamin, he was shadowed by Josh Norman throughout the entire game. He did have 4 targets, so Cam Newton wasn't really looking towards Norman's way the entire game. Benjamin finished with 20 yards and 2 receptions, so it wasn't really a big, day for the second-year player out of Florida State, Kelvin Benjamin. But, moving forward to, both of these teams here, Cam Newton is, I think he's someone you can possibly start, for the fantasy championship this week. They are playing the Atlanta Falcons, so I do expect a really big day, for, the Carolina Panthers and Cam Newton. And, the Washington Redskins, they were in the hunt for a playoff spot. They do need a lot of help, but they are playing the Chicago Bears. So I can possibly see a really good day from the offensive players, Deshaun Jackson, Kirk Cousins. I do expect they can potentially have a really good day against this, the Chicago Bears defense. But, moving forward to other players this week, this week's top performers, there was a lot really notable performers this week. The first top performer, of the weekend was Devontae Freeman, the Atlanta Falcons running back. He finished with 31.5 fantasy points. He did have 139 yards and 3 touchdowns against the worst defense in the league, and as, of course, I am talking about the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Cooks was on fire. The New Orleans Saints were in a shootout against the Arizona Cardinals, and Brandon Cooks finished for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns, so he was on fire throughout the whole game. And then his quarterback, Drew Brees, put on a tremendous show in Arizona. He actually finished with 389 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, yeah, he was putting on a show there at the University of Phoenix Stadium in Tempe, Arizona, against the Cardinals. And LaShawn McCoy, he's been a top 5 fantasy running back throughout the entire year, and he looks like he's on for a strong finish as well. He had 153 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns. And Ty Montgomery, the hybrid receiver running back. The Green Bay Packers looked like they finally found a running back in Ty Montgomery, and he had a big day. 162 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Big day for Ty Montgomery there and the Green Bay Packers as they defeated the Chicago Bears 30-27. Ezekiel Elliott, he had another big day, of course, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 159 yards and a touchdown. Finished with 24.8 fantasy points, and he looks like he's going on a strong finish there to end the year. And one of the top quarterbacks this week in fantasy was someone that wasn't even probably on a lot of rosters. It was Matt Moore. Matt Moore of the Miami Dolphins. He was coming in relief for Ryan Tannehill, and he finished with 236 yards and 4 touchdowns. He literally torched this New York Jets defense. He torched the New York Jets defense, and Miami just demolished the Jets 34-13 on Saturday. Actually, they had a primetime Saturday game. And David Johnson, of course, he's always going to be one of the top running backs this year. He finished with 53 rushing yards and 55 receiving yards. So, he was the first player to have 100 yards from scrimmage in each game for the first 14 games in the season. He is in that category there, and he did had 2 touchdowns on the day. So good job for him. But that it concludes this week's performers for week 15. And when we come back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, I'm gonna discuss a couple of players, if you should trust them or not. AJ Green looks like he's returning this week, and I'm gonna talk about Adrian Peterson's absolutely dreadful game last Sunday against the Colts. But I'll be right back at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And I want to talk about a couple players here who are pretty hard to trust here for the final week of the fantasy season. For some of you guys, this is a very important week. You have a lot of writing, so to speak, to win your fantasy league. And it was reported that AJ Green is slated to return this Sunday against the Cincinnati Bengals. He's officially, he was doubtful for Sunday's game against the Steelers, and he's going to play against the Texans this week and Christmas Eve. So, it's tough to trust a player who is coming off a hamstring injury, and it's tough to trust a player who is in an offense that it hasn't been really producing a lot. I think a better option to consider for the Cincinnati Bengals, receiving core is Tyler Boyd. It's not really an ideal matchup, though, because, it is a Pittsburgh Steelers. They haven't given up 300 passing yards since week 3. So it's a pretty tough matchup for AJ Green if he does decide to return and, against the Houston Texans. The Cincinnati Bengals did play against the Pittsburgh Steelers this past Sunday. They were winning 20-20. They were winning by double digits, so to speak. And then Pittsburgh Steelers, they just came back. So, it was a tough matchup for pretty much everyone on that Cincinnati Bengals team. And this Sunday, looking forward to the Texans. They're a pretty good defense. They've been one of the more underrated defenses in this league because, they're always on the field. They have Brock Osweiler as quarterback. He wasn't producing as much, but that can all change now. It is Tom Savage's first start, so it is, so to speak, that maybe I would just hold off on AJ Green for now, but he does deserve to be on a roster, so to speak. It's tough because hamstring injuries sometimes don't really heal well as you thought. If he decides to come back before he's ready, let's just say AJ Green is not ready right now. It can be really dangerous for AJ Green. He can practically completely tear a muscle there. So, I would just hold off on AJ Green, and going by, his stat line, he is close. I think he's like 37 yards away from a 1,000-yard season. So maybe that plays a part in him coming back. But it's tough to trust AJ Green right now with a nagging injury. Pretty tough matchup. Pretty much, I'm surprised that the Bengals are bringing him back in a season when they're not even in playoff contention. If the Bengals were in playoff contention, I can probably see why they're bringing him in there, but I just don't. I just can't trust AJ Green. I do think Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd are still better options at this point, but I just think it's best to sit AJ Green for those that do have him on the roster there. And another player that that made headlines this past weekend was Adrian Peterson, the Minnesota Vikings running back. The Minnesota Vikings absolutely got torched by the Indianapolis Colts this past Sunday, 34-6. And Adrian Peterson decided to come back because Minnesota Vikings were still in playoff contention, but they look like they're on the brink of elimination right now. Adrian Peterson he didn't do a whole lot. He only got 22 yards on 6 carries. And I knew when Adrian Peterson announced his return this week, I didn't think it was going to go so well. He was averaging like 1.6 yards a carry before Sunday. He did average 3.7, but he just hasn't. Maybe he just doesn't have it anymore. And is he going to come back to being the fantasy running back that we were used to accustomed to seeing? And if let's just say the Vikings are eliminated from playoff contention this week, is he going to play against the Chicago Bears to win the season? So I just don't think so. I don't think so at all, one bit. And looking at the backfield situation for the Minnesota Vikings, Matt Asiata, he looks like he looks more of a fullback. Jared McKinnon just hasn't got it done. They probably have one of the worst running games in all of football. So the Vikings thought maybe Peterson can give him that extra boost to potentially contend for a playoff spot. And I just don't think it's going to. I just don't think Adrian Peterson is someone that you can trust in your lineup moving forward. But he does need to be on the roster, and it's tough for me to see if Adrian Peterson is going to be highly drafted next year. Because he was drafted as a first or second round pick. I don't think he's going to be drafted in any of those rounds. I think he's going to be probably maybe a 5th or 6th rounder, and that is tough, And he just hasn't. Adrian Peterson hasn't got it done. And earlier this season, I did talk about Adrian Peterson is he done as a fantasy running back, if he's done as a relevant fantasy running back, that is. And I said he was completely done. And I was right. He just doesn't have it anymore. It's tough to come back and play with knee injuries when you get to a certain age. I think we keep forgetting that Adrian Peterson is 31 years old. And running backs don't age well in the NFL. So I do still stick by my statement that Adrian Peterson is done as a relevant fantasy running back. Sure, he can maybe be a good player, but for fantasy purposes, I just can't trust him in the lineup. So I would just bench him this week, and moving forward to next season, I don't trust Adrian Peterson either. I don't trust him next year. I think he's someone that I would probably try to stay away from, and he just doesn't. I don't think he just has it anymore. But I'm gonna go to a second break now, and I'm gonna get into this week's top waiver wire pickups. That's right. One more week, guys. Waiver wire pickups. And I will have some names for you guys to potentially add to take you to Title Town this week. But I will have those names for you when we come back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. It is time to get into some top waiver wire pickups of the week. We're not done with that, guys. This is the final week of this fantasy football season, so this is the final waiver wire pickups that I will have this year and is the most important one. So we're going to end this off with the bang. All right. My first name that I think that should get some consideration in the waiver wire is Robbie Anderson, the New York Jets receiver. He's been a really big part of this offense ever since Bryce Petty has been, the quarterback for the Jets. Ever since, he got into that game against the Indianapolis Colts, he's been on fire. He's been highly involved in this offense, and he's someone that looks like he's about to also be involved as well moving forward to end the year. And since that time when Bryce Petty entered the game for the Jets against the Indianapolis Colts on that Monday night, he's been on fire. He has at least 60 yards or more. Against the Colts in 3 weeks ago, he did have 61 yards on 12 targets and 1 touchdown. And then against the 49ers the week after, he did have 99 yards on 11 targets. And then just this past weekend against the Miami Dolphins, he had 80 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets. So he looks like he's about to be someone that looks like that's going to be highly involved in the offense there. And I do like him for the final week of the season. And I think he's someone that needs to be taken seriously on the waiver wire pickups. And I think he can possibly maybe, emerge as a very viable receiver next season. It depends on who is a quarterback for the Jets, though. If Bryce Petty is the quarterback next year for the Jets, then I think Robbie Anderson is someone that is going to be very valuable in the draft next year. And as for the second name on my list, I got Tyler Lockett here. He's playing against, he played against the Los Angeles Rams last Thursday night. He had practically his best game as a pro. He had 130 receiving yards on 9 targets and a touchdown. And, this was probably his second best game of the year. This was his best game as a receiver, but as an overall football player, as a professional football player, this is his second best game. He did have over 100 yards against the Carolina Panthers. Remember, he had 63 yards in that game, and he had a 75-yard rushing score. So he looks like he's finally healthy now. He looks like he's finally involved in the offense, and I expect him to finish big. He is playing against the Arizona Cardinals, a team that got absolutely torched by the New Orleans Saints. And I do like his involvement here for the Seahawks, and I think he's someone that needs to be added. And next year, I do think Tyler Lockett is going to be he's going to be someone that's very valuable. I actually like Tyler Lockett moving to next year, and I think he's someone that needs to be taken seriously this weekend against the Arizona Cardinals. And another player I have on my top waiver wire list is Eli Rogers. He did have 75 yards and a score against the Cincinnati Bengals this past Sunday. And he looks like he is back to being involved in this offense. But the reason why I do think, he's someone that needs to be added is because he's playing against the Ravens at home. When he played against the Ravens in November, early November that is, he had 103 yards on 10 targets. So he's playing that team at home where Big Ben is probably at his best. I think Eli Rogers is slated to have a big day. So I will have to say maybe he can have a bigger day, this weekend against the Baltimore Ravens. And as for my second to last waiver wire pickup of the week, Cameron Meredith of the Chicago Bears. Yes, he's been really involved in this offense lately for the Bears, and he's been a reliable target for Matt Barkley ever since he had that start against the 49ers. Well, against the Detroit Lions 2 weeks ago, he has 72 yards and a touchdown. This past Sunday against the Green Bay Packers, he had 104 yards on 13 targets. He is someone that looks like he has a really good chemistry with Matt Barkley. I know he earlier in the year when Brian Hoyer was the running back, it looks like he was going to be. It looks like he had really good chemistry with Brian Hoyer there, and it looked like it was very questionable if he was going to pan out well with Jay Cutler. Well, Jay Cutler got hurt, and it looks like the quarterback there, Matt Barkley, he really likes throwing it to Cameron Meredith there, and he's playing against a Washington Redskins defense that got absolutely torched by Ted Ginn and Greg Olsen. So I do think he is someone that needs to be, added. I'm not sure if Josh Norman's going to cover him or not. But if Josh Norman does cover Cameron Meredith, I don't know if he's going to have as big as a day. I think he should. But I do think he's someone that needs to be added right now. And as for my last name on the list, I got Hunter Henry, the tight end for the San Diego Chargers. Yeah, he had a pretty solid fantasy day against the Oakland Raiders. He had 37 yards and a touchdown. That was his 7th touchdown of the year. So he was someone that has emerged as a red zone target for Phil Rivers. He's in an offense that is they pass a lot. He's in a highly rated passing offense because, the running game kind of really did take a hit with Melvin Gordon there. I expect him to have a big day against the Cleveland Browns. And, the theme that we had going on this whole season is if the player is going against the 49ers and the Cleveland Browns, you got to start him. So he is going against a very soft Cleveland Browns defense. I expect him to have a really big day this weekend against the Cleveland Browns. And that concludes the show, guys. That concludes the show. And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. I don't think we're going to have a show on Friday, actually. I think we're actually off for the holiday, but we should be back on Tuesday. And I'm not sure if we're going to have a second show next week. But, I just want to say good luck to you guys this week, in your leagues. Hopefully you get these players to start in your leagues. And, that concludes the show. And, you can always follow the show on a variety of platforms. We're always on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and on the website, gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter at GSMC_FFootball and on Instagram at the same handle. That's at GSMC_FFootball. And you can also like the show on Facebook at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And as always, I'm Jeremiah Martinez, and I will see you guys next week if we don't have a show on Friday. Good luck, guys. Good luck in your leagues.